Check, check. Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome, welcome. Welcome to another Arizona Talks. Thanks for being here. If you're in the back, if you're still standing up there, there's a lot of open seats up here. So feel free to fill in the space and grab an empty seat if you see it. Perfect. Well, thank you all. I want to take a second to thank each and every single one of you for making the time to come to this event. All of this takes a lot of effort and time to put together, and it's just amazing to see that this is only our second event this year, and we're already gaining so much traction, one event after the other, with more great attendees like yourselves. We love coming to Greenwood, and we love discussing ideas in Arizona and across our country. We want to when we think about putting things like these together, we think about three issues. We think about speakers, we think about issues, and we think about the venue. The venue is just as much part as the conversation as the rest of the parts. And when we met Megan, we decided to add another factor to planning our events, and that is a purposeful pint. To tell us about this place, the place that we're sitting here today, and the power of the purposeful pint, I wanted to invite the owner of this place, Greenwood Brewing, Megan Greenwood, to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Let's keep that round of applause going for Carlos for putting all of this together, the founder of Arizona Talks. Hi, I'm Megan Greenwood. I'm the owner of Greenwood Brewing. We actually opened in July of 2020, if you can believe that. We opened in a very interesting time to open a business. I'm actually an engineer. I worked in manufacturing facilities for a long time and was a home brewer and found out that my passion was beer. So I decided to take a leap and start a brewery. And here we are, probably 5 years later, sitting in this beer garden. We actually built this brewery. The brewery's out right here, so everything that you're drinking comes right out of this space, right here on Roosevelt Row. So one thing that we did when I started, even before I started brewing, I realized that a lot of my most important conversations were had over craft beer. Whenever I was talking with a friend, wanting to get honest, having vulnerable conversations. And so that's been our theme here at Greenwood, is to have great conversations over craft beer. And that's evolved into the slogan at Greenwood, which is the power of the purposeful pint, and having great conversations over craft beer, which is exactly what we're going to do tonight. So thank you all for being here, and cheers to all of you and all of our speakers and everybody here. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. This is a wonderful place to be able to have this conversation and events like this. Greenwood is a wonderful partner of Arizona Talks, and anytime that you're down here, feel free to grab a taco from Taco Cello, then come right back here and grab a beer, because they let you bring food in from other places, and it's wonderful. So today we're celebrating civil dialogue. Today you will hear from some of Arizona's top voices on these issues. Arizona Talks started from discussions much like we're having today, right? Around friends, around food or drink, talking about politics, religion, and everything you're not supposed to talk about. We've been doing events like these for a few years now, and today Arizona Talks is a growing nonprofit with an advisory board of leaders from across the political spectrum and a phenomenal staff that works together to create events and conversations like this. So if you're in the staff, if you're in the advisory board, would you please raise your hand and be acknowledged? Give them a round of applause, please. They're fantastic. They lead us through the research, inviting speakers, putting events together, and so we thank them. Tonight, you will hear from 6 distinguished guests. They will talk to us about themselves and their political story and how it relates to voting and elections in America. There's only one rule for tonight: stay civil, unless you hear something you don't like. That's a joke. Stay civil. We've been able to do these events for years, and it's just amazing, no matter how much you hear in the news that we're divided, that most of us are willing to hear the other side, are willing to understand one another, and live together in this wonderful country. The whole program will be about an hour long, so feel free to come and go. The restroom's right through these doors. You can get there through any point of access in this building. Also, the beer will keep pouring, so I recommend that you go over there, get another beer. Finally, I want to bring to our attention what is happening in Russia and Ukraine. It feels weird if we didn't mention it tonight. We can only imagine what people are going through there, and I encourage you to reflect about how lucky we are to be with one another in this space, to talk about free and fair elections. This is so important and so great that we get to do that here in this country. If you care about our system of government, if you care about our philosophy and politics, or if you care about your community and want to see what's better for it, we need spaces like this. Spaces where we can talk about hard issues with people that are our neighbors and sometimes disagree with. We invite you to take on that responsibility with us and continue our tradition of civil dialogue and open debate. Please donate to Arizona Talks and support our work. Tonight, the interest for the speakers will be a bit short in the interest of time to hear everyone's political story. I want to thank every single one of the speakers tonight because it is hard to find people that are still willing to speak to a crowd about very controversial issues. We were surprised about that. And so part of our mission is not only to bring diverse voices, but to continue that tradition of public debate, public dialogue. So you are all part of that tonight. We have 2 interview series up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So I encourage you to take out your phone and tag us at Arizona Talks. We are a small team with a mighty mission, and we'd love for you to join us on this journey with Arizona Talks. So having said all that, give a round of applause to the speakers, the staff, Greenwood, and all of yourselves. So today, first speaker, I want to invite my friend Mike Noble. I've known him for quite a while now. He's a pollster here in Arizona for OH Predictive Insights. Please help me welcome Mike Noble. Heck yeah.
Testing. 1, 2. Hey, give a round of applause for Carlos here and all of his staff putting this event together. I will say, I do events from time to time, speaking, and I love this group. You know, there's a lot of good organizations here in Arizona, but I really love the premise Arizona Talks around, especially given today's current climate, where normally you could talk about issues and not have to worry about people yelling at you or saying you're wrong or a liar or things like that, right? So anyways, I find it very refreshing they have that. So anyways, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. I know you could be doing a million other things here with your time, so thank you for coming. So my name is Mike Noble. I'm the Chief of Research over at a little company called OH Predictive Insights. So yeah, whoa, hey, we got a fan. Oh yeah, there we go. We don't get a lot in the nerd space, as I like to call it. And so when, as a public opinion research, you know, what does that do if you're not familiar with that at all? Is that, you know, we go around and we survey. You can go and ask every individual out there, or you can take a statistically significant randomized sample of that group, and you can have a pretty high probability of knowing what they're thinking or feeling, or kind of why people do what they do. And so when talking about this, you got a really great group of lineup of speakers here today, and that on the election, on the nuts and bolts section, they're going to do a great job regarding that. So I'm going to talk to you a little all about the perceptions aspect, or kind of what people are thinking or feeling when it comes to this issue of election integrity. And we saw this issue really wasn't brought up very much until this last election with some of those dynamics that were going on. There was some rhetoric or some items that were going around that basically created some cause or some pause in our elections. And I thought it was kind of fortuitous that Arizona was home to one of the a few audits I was out there, at least the one that got probably the most press over 6 months. And normally you get a break in the off year, but I did not get one because of that audit. Anyways, and so it was interesting with that because from my perspective, Arizona, especially Maricopa County, has a really great election system compared to many other places. We're actually in the higher echelons of that. So hats off, Mr. Richer, him and his predecessors and that. And so it's interesting that we had this, but again, perception. So when we were surveying a lot on this, especially like last July, we're looking at that, you know, were they confident in the elections that we had? It was interesting. 8 out of 10 did think that Arizona's elections were in fact secure, and it was correct. Interesting. You wouldn't probably believe that, seeing some of the articles. But again, we've seen kind of some of these perceptions that were going on. But we noticed that it wasn't equal across the board. So even though that was a high number, when you look at this hyper-partisanship that we have now found ourselves in today, is that, and it's the most extreme that we've ever seen over the decades of research. And when you look at some of the partisan differences, Republicans, only 6 in 10 thought the election was secure. However, when you look at the Democrats, 9 in 10 thought it was secure, and then and then 8 in 10 of independent voters in the middle. And the way Arizona's kind of broken up voting wise, it's basically a third of Republicans or red team, Democrats is blue team, and then the folks in the middle, the free agents, as I like to call them. And so you have that, but with a slight bend to Republicans have a slight advantage here. But you notice that it wasn't equal across the board. So based on one's party affiliation, there were some disparities there. Oh, there's a grapefruit. And so, like, what is that noise? Yeah, I was like, get down. So it was one of the things, but there's two, right? There was two main narratives going on last election. They were in two camps. One is, while the election was not run perfectly, there is no credible evidence of voter fraud that was widespread enough to have changed the outcome of the election. That was narrative one. And narrative two is evidence has been uncovered which shows that the election was stolen from President Trump in a number of states that the media and election officials have called for Joe Biden. And I was one of those people. And I was right. And so what was funny that looking at that, so like how do those statements match up? So 39% of Republicans thought, yeah, there wasn't any fraud, there wasn't any, again, it was run best we could. And then 85% of Democrats, 76% of independents believe that. But then we look at the stolen portion, 61% of Republicans, only 15% of Democrats, and 24% of independents. So very much from a perception side, this was kind of created, I think, due to a lot of the rhetoric out there. And I think that when you look at this, I think it's important to remember people, again, you can sit there and do a lot of homework, and once all these other speakers go up, you're going to realize elections are complicated. There's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of nuances to it, and it's not as simple as some of these catchphrases or maybe a picture you see on the internet, right? But the sad reality is most people don't really want to dive down and really dig into the details. It's sometimes easier with a pithy line. But they'll go into kind of more of those details. But when we look at some of the sentiment that we have, there's kind of now, because of this aftermath, it's like, okay, did this really have an impact on voter enthusiasm? Again, a lot of talk, elections. Hey, these elections are bogus. Why should I even vote? Right? I mean, should I? Because if it doesn't matter, right? If it's all rigged. Anyways, it's interesting when you look at the voters, we've been tracking people's enthusiasm throughout the year, and you see that there's roughly about, for the general election, about 80% of registered voters are motivated or enthusiastic to vote about the election, and about 70% of voters won the primary election. So we're actually not seeing a big degradation in folks losing faith in our electoral system. So that's good news, right? Heck yeah, because you don't have a election, if you don't have faith in your elections, you don't exactly have a democracy, right? So again, it's important that you have that. And so one of the other things, like there's a couple other measures now since this rhetoric, since all this going on, you're seeing it here in Arizona, you're seeing it across the country in these state legislatures, and not only that, on the federal level too, where they're trying to institute things to make elections more secure or on other realms more open. And one of the things is, well, what do Arizona voters want, right? What we want, we just released actually some polling this morning, actually. You check out ohpredictive.com. Anyone else? And so you go check that out. And it's funny, like two of the big things is that there's coming up was that Arizona voters, should they get rid of mail-in voting, which roughly 90% of our voters voted with that absentee ballot last time, whether they voted by mail or took it and walked it in or dropped it off at the place. So 9 in 10 of folks voted with that method, and we were one of the early adopters. I think it was back in 2004. Correct me if I'm wrong. 2005, come on. You round up, 2005. So 2004, 2005 / is that we institute early voting. So we had adopted it pretty early compared to like states like Connecticut. Pretty much they all vote on election day. So we've been around this issue or known it for a while. We've trusted and there hasn't been any issues, but yet all this rhetoric and everything coming out. What we saw is like one of the ballot initiatives voters may have a choice to vote on in the election. Should we get rid of early voting? And 75% of Arizonans, or 3/4 of voters, said, you know what? I like early voting. It's convenient. Some of the groups that were in favor of it, or the biggest ones were, those that plan to vote by mail in 2022. 91% of them want to continue doing that. But voters age 55 plus. Again, our senior citizens, especially ones maybe a little tougher to get around. Again, it's a convenience compared to having to get up and get in line, especially if everyone's got to go on election day, right? And then voters who lived in Arizona for at least 5 years or more. So people that have been tenured are kind of around here and seen what early voting is like. However, on the flip side, on that opposition, which there was only 10%, 1 in 10 that oppose early voting, but the groups that really kind of stuck out demographically or psychographically were that those that plan to drop off their ballots in person in 2022, so they're already planning to vote in person anyway, so hey, they're okay with that. But then it was interesting, conservatives had 21% of them, and then 17% of Republicans. Not a large share, but still, again, groups that are a little bit higher than others. And then voters who lived in Arizona less than 5 years, 16% of them said they'd prefer that way, but again, less experience. But it helps paint a picture of kind of where some of these groups are. But then one of the other questions was, there's this quest for proving your ID. Proving that you are. So whether it's like your driver's license or last four of your social, etc. Having to give up some information and prove, hey, I am Mike Noble and I am a registered voter. I can prove it. And so it was interesting. 64% of Arizona registered voters agreed with that. They actually were okay with saying, hey, showing a little ID to show that, hey, I'm allowed to vote. Great. Actually, folks were in favor of that, and then 14% were opposed to it. So one of the takeaways is that with these measures that are going on or some of these areas with the elections, what we do know about voters, they want convenience, but they also want security. And again, but there's a lot of ways to do it when they get into the nuances, and I think that's why they picked me to go first, because I could prime the pump for all these very smart folks when it comes to elections. So whether it's our current Secretary of State or Maricopa, the biggest county hands down where 6 in 10 likely voters derive from, the big gorilla in the room, are going to be able to talk about it. And we even have Arizona's very own data guru in the house. Woo! Woo! Data guru. Anyways, and so he doesn't make many public appearances. When he does, anyways, he got a really great group. So anyways, I want to thank you all. And that's probably what I have, but you got a lot of great speakers, so I'm going to give the rest of the time to them. Cool?
Thank you so much, Mike. Give it up for Mike again. Mike Noble, OH Predictive Insights. Next, I want to introduce Arizona State Senator for LD 30 and Arizona Democratic Chair, Raquel Terán. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Carlos. Gracias to the whole team. And so the message to us as we prepared to come over here, it said, speak from the heart. So I'm going to do half heart and some notes. But my name is Raquel Terán. I am honored to represent Legislative District 30 in Phoenix and Glendale. I also serve as the chair of the Arizona Democratic Party, and I'm also a mom of a 6-year-old who's playing baseball, so I'm going to rush out of here after this. And just a little bit about myself and how I got to this place of being a chair and serving at the state legislature. I'm originally from Southern Arizona, from Douglas and Agua Prieta. I'm from the border. I was born in Douglas, raised on the Mexican side of the border. We grew up on International Street, the street that divides the United States and Mexico, and I'm so proud to be from the border. My parents and my grandparents were folks who served our communities, and I basically learned community organizing by them. Even though there was no title of a community organizer, they didn't carry that title, but I learned to serve through their example. And the border, for me, represented what my dad told me all growing up, is that the United States is the place of fairness, is the place of equity, it's the place of opportunity, the American dream. And I remember the people coming to the border and trying to look for that American dream, to look for better lives for themselves or reunite with families, things that still happen at the border. And I also remember how at the border there was a fence. There was when our backyard, there was a fence, and it was an imperfect fence with wires. Then it became bars. And obviously we saw this whole situation where it was going to become a wall. For me, when I started to see what that border really represented and how political it was, and the rise of what we considered an anti-immigrant sentiment in the state of Arizona, I wanted to get involved. I come from a place of faith, and my natural place was to go to church. I spent a lot of time folding white ribbons and pasting them to flyers in the search of prayer for comprehensive immigration reform. And I spent a lot of time doing that, maybe a couple of weeks, not a lot of time, but I was a loyal volunteer. But I'm like, okay, the prayer was just not, it was good, but it was not the avenue of engagement that I wanted. And it was a huge march that happened in downtown Phoenix in a fight for comprehensive immigration reform. It was April 10th of 2006. And there were 200,000 people that met at the state fairgrounds in white t-shirts that carried sign, "I love you, America, why don't you love us?" Fight for immigration reform, support for dreamers. But the theme of that march was today we march, tomorrow we vote. And I was so happy that I went to that march because I ended up at a volunteer table. And they were just recruiting people to sign in, folks, and also to get people registered to vote. So they handed me a clipboard with voter registration forms and signing sheets. And that's the easiest day I've ever registered people to vote, because there were 200,000 people. ¿Quién se quiere registrar para votar? ¿Quién quiere registrarse para votar? And it was so easy to register people to vote. When I turned in my clipboard to the organization that was leading that effort, it was Mi Familia Vota. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they are an organization that has been part of the movement that has transformed the state of Arizona into a battleground state. And the mission of that organization was to engage the Latino community in the decision-making process. We are 30% of the population. And I knew right then and there that if I wanted to do anything about what was happening with the anti-immigrant sentiment in the state of Arizona, we needed to build Latino political power. And so I just connected with them and stayed engaged. Years later, I became the state director. I ran for office and won, and it lost in 2012, and then ran again in 2018, and I was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives. I served there 3 years, and then I was appointed to the Senate just last year. And I am so proud of the work that has been done by these movement-building organizations who have said, yes, our voices need to be heard at the ballot box. But what we are seeing right now at our state legislature, I'm afraid, is a reaction to those communities coming out and voting. Those communities, I know I'm a little bit light, but they look browner, those communities that are indigenous communities, Latino communities, Black communities. Many people did not like the outcome of the election. And instead of fighting with different ideas, the extreme right is coming to our state legislature with a flu of anti-democracy, because let's call it what it is, anti-democracy legislation that is going to make it harder for people to vote. And we're at a pivotal time where we can take a stand, where we need to be loud and clear, that we can create so many barriers. We can't chip away at the way that the ballot is cast, because you know what comes later. Who is going to cast that ballot? You know it, I know it, the extreme right knows it. And we need to make sure that we're fighting. You know, as the chair of the Arizona Democratic Party, I get asked a lot of questions. This is a fight between Democrats and Republicans. I dare. That's a false equivalency. This is not a war between Republicans and Democrats. I see it as a group of people who are trying to limit people to vote, and a group of people who are fighting for Democrats, independents, Republicans. And I believe there's more on that camp. I believe that there are more people like the Arizona Democrats, like the Democratic Caucus, who are willing to fight for democracy. And that's where we are right now. So let's make sure that as we continue to hear great speakers, Recorder Richards, Secretary of State Hobbs, the data guru, and Heather Carter, who has made it that we think in a bipartisan manner. You know, it's a special night. And I think that what Arizona Talks did tonight of bringing this particular group of people together says something. So let's not leave it at talk. Las palabras se las lleva el viento. Talk flies with the wind. Let's take action and make sure that we're protecting democracy. And I went off script. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Next, I want to introduce the Executive Vice President with the Greater Phoenix Leadership. She's also an advisory board member for Voter Choice Arizona. Please help me welcome Heather Carter.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Is everybody having a wonderful time tonight? It's such an honor to be here with you. And I just want to say it's such a privilege to be with people that really want to talk about making Arizona, the best place to live, work, and raise a family. So the homework assignment was to come here and share my personal story and how I got involved. And I'm looking around the room and I see so many of my friends that I served with at the Capitol. And I don't know if you know the story of how did Heather Carter end up at the Capitol. So give me just 1 minute to tell you that story, and then we'll dive into some more important content around free and fair elections. So how many of you were in Arizona in 2010? Did you live? Okay, good. So when I say the bill 1070, do you know what I'm talking about? Right? Okay, lifelong Republican. 1070 was happening all around Arizona. We were in the midst of the Great Recession, massive budget cuts. I'm teaching public school. I used to be a 7th grade teacher. My joke is nothing prepared me for working at the legislature like being a middle school teacher. You can draw any conclusions you want about that. However, I was working at the universities. And so I went to a going away party for somebody who I worked with. And we were sitting around complaining about bills in the state legislature. The world was talking about 1070. We were talking about 1040. Does anybody in here remember what 1040 was? Anybody? It was the first bill for the teacher evaluation system in Arizona. And we said, wouldn't it be great if there was actually a teacher in office to be able to vote on bills that impacted your profession as a teacher? So, I'm sure, how many of you were in student government, right? We hear this all the time. Oh, I was in student government. I ran for class president. I was my ASASU student senator. Do we have any ASASU former? Well, I see one hand proudly raising in the back, 2 hands proudly raising in the back. So that night I said, well, I'm going to run for governor. Now, my friends, thank goodness, said, you might want to set your sights a little bit more realistic. And if I had done that, I would have been the Matthew Jetty of the 2010 election. Thank you. Some people in here get that joke. And if you don't get that joke, he primaried Governor Brewer and lost. But I decided I'm going to look for a position that I can really have an impact, and it was at the state legislature. So we Googled, true story, Googled what seats were open. 2 open seats in the state legislature. That was Saturday night. Monday, I got into my car, drove down to the Capitol, and filed to run for office. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, well, I guess now I have to go get signatures. Now, a lot of people plan, take years and years and years to plan to run for office. And I said, I just showed up at the Capitol and threw my name in the hat. people would say like, oh, aren't you raising money? I'm like, well, I'm not going to raise money until I know that I'm on the ballot. Bad idea. Like lessons learned along the line. So I started getting signatures. And I'm standing out in front of the library one day, and this guy comes up to me. And of course, I mean, as you can tell, I like to talk, right? So I'm talking to everybody that walks up. The guy goes, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm Heather Carter, and I'm running for the state legislature. I want to be in the Arizona House of Representatives. Are you a PC? I'm like, what's a PC? An hour and a half later, I got my first sort of lesson on politics in Arizona. The first PC meeting I went to, I'm not actually giving you a great inspiration to run for office, but trust me, at the end, I'm going to say, I hope some of you decide to run for office. The first PC meeting I go to, I'll say, I mean, he probably won't care if I share his name, Ray Barnes. Who remembers Ray Barnes? Walks up to my husband and I and says, well, you know, hand grenades don't discriminate. We're like, what? They go, well, if they choose a rifle to take you out, she'll probably be the only one to go. But if they take you both out with a hand grenade, I hope you have a plan in place. That was my first PC meeting with my husband, who's 6'4", okay, not well received. But you know what? I had a mission. I wanted to do the best I could for the state of Arizona. I wanted to solve problems. So this gets to my next lesson. If anybody's ever heard me speak, you've heard me talk about politics and policy. How many have heard me talk about the politics and the policy? So bear with me while I say it for a second time. The skills and the attributes that make you a great politician are completely different and unique than the skills and the abilities that make you a good policymaker. And if you're going to be successful in this world, you have to live in the middle. Think of it as a Venn diagram. Think of it as two sides of the same coin. But if you do not spend as much time focused on politics, you will not have the privilege of doing the policy. And if you spend all of your time in the weeds reading statute with all your lawyer friends, dealing with bills, you won't get reelected. You have to live in both worlds. I had the great privilege of serving with so many people in here. Katie, you and I sat next to each other on the floor, did we not? I think every year I bought your daughter's Girl Scout cookies, right? Every single year. Paul, I know you're here because I haven't seen Paul since, the day I left the Capitol. I got beat in my Republican primary. It's the last time I saw Paul was at the Capitol when we shut down for COVID. I don't want to get all verklempt, but, Paul and I have been through some absolute incredible pieces of legislation and some incredible wars down at the Capitol for good policy. And I can remember when we got that bill signed with the governor's office for the childhood sexual assault victims, and you handed me that book, Profile and Courage. I still have that book, and I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to both of you for serving. Anybody else in here in office, because it's kind of dark, I can't see. I mean, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Steve, you're up next, I think, or two after me. Thank you. You're going to hear an incredible story here about I can't see who's in. See, where? You're hiding. Thank you, Caesar Shot. Thank you, Caesar Shot, for serving. Good to see you. And guys, the people that are here really want to solve problems. In my 10 years at the Capitol, we did some big things. Katie, we did Medicaid restoration, right? Who was here in that first speech and heard Chuck talk about Medicaid restoration? Oh my gosh, he didn't even tell you all the fun stuff. When you, afterwards, after you've had a few beers, I'll tell you the rest of the story. It's going to make Frank Underwood, and here's my joke about that. Nobody got pushed in front of a train. Sorry for spoilers if you haven't seen that. But it was absolutely incredible what we went through to get Medicaid restoration over the finish line. Kids Care. Katie, were you still there when we did Kids Care? Middle of the night, where Kids Care was concocted when we got it restored? On the 51 driving. Here's what we're going to do. I called up my good friend Eric Meyer, and I said, Eric, you just have to trust me. I need you to keep talking. They were debating some random bill on the floor, and he's like, what do you mean? I go, you can't ask me any questions. I'm not going to give you any details. You need to keep talking because I've got to do something. And he trusted me. And we took 2 hours, and we were able to craft the motions that we had to do on the floor to get Kids Care restoration over the finish line. There's a whole story in with that as well. I'm still very, very proud of the direct lab testing bill. Anybody ever heard of a little company called Theranos? I will now be in a Hollywood movie. When you see yourself on a plane flying on vacation because you're in the documentary about Elizabeth Holmes. That's like surreal. Now, I can tell you all the stories and some really crazy stories about when Elizabeth Holmes came to the Capitol, but at the end of the day, that bill is still good policy. And if anybody had a COVID test during the last 2 years, because of that bill, you were able to go and get a direct lab test on your own without a doctor's order. Great policy. So these are all the things that you get to do when you have the privilege of serving the people of Arizona. So we're going to go through a little exercise, and it'll lead right into all of them, the rest of the speeches on elections. But how do you get there? You got to win elections. So if everybody could stand up real quick. We're going to model what a partisan district looks like in terms of election. Okay, so everybody's standing up. This is your district. We represent over 325,000 people. It's bigger than some congressional districts. We have one of the largest legislative districts in the country. Half of the room right now sit down. In a party-dominated district, the majority party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, the decision on who serves you will be made in the primary. Now we're going to play with those people who are either independent or of the party that is in the majority. But I don't know, and there's way smarter people here on numbers. I know we've got Garrett. I follow your Twitter every single solitary day. Stephen, you and I have been going back and forth saying, what are the numbers now? People don't vote in the primary. That's a problem. It's like 30% turnout. So let's do this. Of the group that's standing, can you self-figure out? I'm going to just say from about, Katie, you get to stand. Your group, everybody down here, though, you have to sit down. So everybody sit down. Now you've got this group. Now this group is made up of some really interesting voters. They're both Republican and independent in a Republican primary, right? Independents, I'm sorry, your voter turnout in the primary is not great. So, Steve, how many people you want to sit down? You're the county recorder. You tell them. How many of these group do you want to sit down? You're down. Okay, sit down. Okay.
You smiled at me, so you're down.
Okay. So now look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is just a visual representation. This group still standing will be the people who get to decide who represents you in Arizona. In more than 20 of the legislative districts, and that is on the Republican side or the Democrat side. I'm sorry, but there is something wrong with that because they get to decide what you eat, where you drink, how much you're going to get paid for doing your job, whether your road's going to get paid, whether your teacher's going to get paid. It's a big, big responsibility, but look how many people are actually participating and actually making that decision for those who serve at the Capitol. So thank you. Give them a round of applause for doing that. So now, as you heard, I work at Greater Phoenix Leadership, which is just an absolutely incredible organization. Bo, I know you're here, you're a member of GPL. Thank you to the CEOs that step up every day to do the great work for Arizona. And we really care about electing people who are solutions-oriented. We want people to solve problems, not create problems. And in order to do that, we have to create a path as a state for those voters who care about solutions to not only be able to vote in a free and fair election, but to have somebody to vote for. So last question, how many of you in here have done Valley Leadership, Flynn Brown Academy, any one of those leadership type trainings? Every year we're graduating people from those organizations. We need those people to step up. How many of you, I won't make you raise your hand, just think in your head, how many of you have ever even said, you know what, I just wish I had a little bit more influence or opportunity to impact the future of Arizona. I want you to think about running for office. So with that, we have so many other great speakers here. It is my privilege and honor to be here, and I can't wait to share all those other fun stories with you if you are interested. So thanks for having me here tonight.
Thank you so much, Heather. So next, you've heard him in every single speech so far. I don't know if you can tell who's coming up next, but his name, well, I'll tell you this. He's a data analyst with ABC 15. He's also known as the data guru on Twitter. Please help me welcome Garrett Archer. Thanks, Garrett.
Hello.
So you've heard from a bunch of politicians and a guy who's a chief of research who does presentations for a living. I'm a data analyst. And I'm much better on Twitter, so I've got this small font thing, and I'll see what I can do here. So my name is Garrett Archer. I work with ABC 15. I have a very sort of a unique pathway towards the media. A lot of people in, there's this umbrella term politics, and there's a lot of people in politics. In fact, there's several people in this room that I have either worked with or for in my 12 years out here. But I started in politics, in retail politics. I worked for both Republican and Democrat campaigns. I worked for campaigns at every single level, from governor down to state legislature. I've also worked for Congress, and I've worked for the state. And in that time at the state, most of my time was spent at the elections department. Hi, Katie. And that's where I learned how to do elections administration. And why I'm telling you all of this, of course, is that I came to the media after all that. A lot of times, in the media, you get journalists, people that graduate from Cronkite or whatnot, and they start in journalism and then shift, and sometimes they shift into politics, and I kind of took the opposite. So I do have a unique perspective when it comes to election coverage, and I'm learning every single day. As I said, I've been at ABC 15 for a couple years now, and all right, so elections are my passion, and it's really the numbers behind the elections. I've been covering them since 2014 publicly on Twitter. A lot of people trusted just the numbers I've given. I started out doing early ballot tracking. That's really the initial thing we started with, and then it's really umbrellaed from there. But really, my coverage is really focused on the why of elections, and why that is that with the numbers, a lot of times we're talking about what were the behaviors that people made to get an election to where it was. Election is, when you analyze the data in election, you're analyzing people, and people are the currency, and people change over time. The population that you're looking at changes over time, and so obviously an election changes over time. And that why is very important to people. And so that's sort of where I started my coverage, and really it was the data behind that. This public data that I've been working with for years, the early ballot data, the precinct level results, the voter registration data. These are the three foundations of much of what election analysts do. But then came 2020, and that really changed the dynamic entirely on not just how I cover elections, but how really the media needs to start thinking about covering elections in general. And when I talk elections, I want you to know that I'm talking more about really the election and not the campaign. There are certain ways to cover the campaign. I'm talking about the election itself. So, as you've already heard, elections are extremely complicated. There's no question about that, but what's interesting about elections, and I can tell you someone who worked in them, is that they are complicated, but they don't appear complicated. I mean, think about it. You're counting votes, right? I mean, one person, one vote, it seems quite easy. But there are so many variables that go into counting these votes. And the general public doesn't really have that much of an idea of what goes into counting these votes. And so it is extremely complicated. So one of the things that we have to do now in the media is the how. How are these votes counted? What is it that the election departments are doing and what they're not doing to have transparency in the vote, how the vote is protected, all of the things around the election that several years ago, when you turned into coverage for an election, pretty much anyone just wanted to know, hey, who won, right? You know, that's all you cared about. But now we want to know how it worked. And the biggest issue to covering this is how to make it easy for people to understand, especially in broadcast media. A lot of people turn to broadcast media for their news. And my job is to take something as complicated as elections and try to distill it in a minute and a half. That is really hard to do. Just, you know, it's hard to do, especially because, you know, one of the things that we don't want to do is be dismissive. You know, I don't want to be dismissive. And so in my coverage, I'm attempting to just lay out the numbers as they are and do a lot of pre-bunking. I think that's really where things are going in 2022 and beyond for, and you did see some of this in 2020 in some areas. Like, for example, the New York Times back in October of 2020 did a piece about how the early ballots were being counted by each of the counties. And the reason they did this, it was one of the first pre-bunking pieces that I had seen, because if you recall, and I'm sure many of you did, you know, a lot of the issues that people brought up when they were alleging election fraud were, you know, this, they called it the 3 a.m. ballot drop, where, you know, Trump was leading on Election Day, which is true. He was leading on Election Day in most states. And then all of a sudden, things changed in several key states. And this became a question of why? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Well, this New York Times piece, and something that media now pretty much has to think about doing in several instances, is it explained that, you know, these early, first of all, just to back up really quick, COVID-19 really changed the dynamic of how people voted, okay? Democrats really changed their behavior and started voting early in many places. Now, Arizona has a very robust early voting system. So if you looked at 2014, 2016, Democrats and Republicans had a very, both sort of equally voted early. But in these other states, Democrats really started to pick up on voting early. And then the Republicans voted on Election Day. So the states with the quote-unquote 3 a.m. ballot drop, these are states in which they didn't really have a history of voting early, and they counted their early ballots after they counted the Election Day ballots. Here in Arizona, we didn't do that. We counted the election, we do an 8 p.m. drop. I'm sure, you know, I have a catchphrase, Maricopa incoming. It's one of my older ones. And there's meaning behind that catchphrase, because when Maricopa comes in, especially at 8 p.m., that pretty much dictates the rest of the night. You know, with very few exceptions. 2020 is the exception to this rule, but pre-2020, if you were, and I'm off script now, so whatever. If pre-2020, if you are looking at what happens after the 8 p.m. Maricopa drop, most of the time, a candidate does not survive if they're over a point or a point and a half. Whoever has that lead of literally a point, and it could be a statewide race, it doesn't matter. The race is over because 75% of the ballots came in right there. Now, I know, of course, the cinema race was a little different because there was a lot. 2018 was, you know, the county system had not really caught up to the number of people that wanted to vote in 2018. So they had a bit of a backlog. But aside from that, you know, prior to that, point and a half or so, that was the person that was going to win because the Election Day ballots were just not going to be enough. And, you know, going back to 2018 too, that's a really good example because there was less controversy on the 2018 Kyrsten Sinema race, but it's still just as important because we had to explain, and this is, you know, the media has to do a good job of this, explaining as to why something like that could happen. Why does a situation in which one candidate starts out and then 5-6 days later the other candidate flips it? And people think of elections, especially when you have that sort of time frame, as being on a linearity. They think there's a time sequence to it. There is no time sequence to elections. It's an illusion. Now, it's an illusion we all play the game on. I do it too. Everybody does it. We all follow what happens at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., all that stuff. But that's an illusion because the ballots were counted. The ballots are already in. Polls closed at 8 p.m. Any sort of time, and I keep looking over you guys because you guys you're giving me like I'm like, oh, okay, I'm right. Maricopa County elections over there. All right, so it's an illusion. There is no time signature. It's all the ballots are already in, and anything we're seeing is either a random distribution, a non-random distribution, because it's not like they sit there and the county does not just take their ballots and dump them all in one big pile for everything and say, okay, this is now a perfectly randomly distributed curve, and so we know that the election is going to come out this way because we've randomly distributed. No, they grab ballots. They count ballots, and they just all get counted. And because there's no reason to have statistically random samples while they're counting ballots, because eventually the ballots are going to get counted. So that's one of the things that the media has to do a better job on, is understand that when people say, well, why does a candidate start out the night winning and then losing 5 days later, that there are explanations for that, and most of them are not nefarious. Let's see if I can get back on script right here. So, see, I'm doing that. Sorry. Okay. All right, so, I know, right? All right, so here's another issue we have in the media. The current environment has about 30% of people that are getting their news are not listening to the mainstream media anymore. And I get it. Look, I get it. A lot of people, believe that the mainstream media has a left-leaning bias, and so they want to go and find media that comports to their worldview. I get that, but unfortunately, a lot of that alternative media space was very irresponsible on how they covered election-related data, and not just now. I don't want to just blame the alternative media, but I do want to blame the people that were feeding this information. These studies they were doing, the studies from Dr. Shiva, obviously the audit, everything that came around that. The alternative media sort of covered that as just these were ground truths, and then it was left to us to pick up the pieces. Now, I'm in a very unique position, as I said, because I understand this data. And this year, really, 2020, really opened up the world of data for elections. I mean, before 2020, I never touched a cast vote record. And that is probably the most complicated public data set you can get in elections. It is especially in Maricopa County, it is a massive multiple gigabyte file that it's literally every contest, every vote, every contest, everything, just the entire ballot universe in a computer file. That's where we are nowadays. We can do this, okay? Yes, the ballot images, we can talk about that. I know the legislature has 10,000 files, exactly. 10,000 files that we had to put together in a Spark data frame. I'm not going to go into what Spark is, but it's really obnoxious, and try to analyze this. And we found out some really interesting things this year. I mean, we just look, and this is data that was counted and tabulated by the machines, and I worked with a bunch of people, and we found out that 75,000 Republicans in Maricopa County. And the reason we knew they were Republicans, again, these are all, the ballots are secret. We don't know who these people are. But we determined they were Republicans because out of 16 partisan races, they voted for 8 or more Republicans, okay? And we found out 75,000 of these Republicans that voted for 8 or more Republicans in Maricopa County, they voted for everyone but Donald Trump. Now, do I know why they did that? Of course not. But all I know is that shows, and you think about it, 2.1 million ballots, 75,000. That's a tiny fraction of people in Maricopa County, but we are so close. We are such a split state now that that really matters. That 75,000 matters. But in the grand scheme of things, if you're talking about political statistics, 75,000 out of 2.1 million is nothing. And these are the people that voted contrary to what you'd expect. And that made a massive difference because there was not the same number. There were Democrats that did the same thing. We found Democrats that voted, 8 Democrats up and down, 8 or more, but then didn't vote for Joe Biden. But it was a significantly smaller number. And so when you take those together, it factors out and you say, this is the ticket splitters that changed 2020. Now, the other analysis we did, and I put this one out really early because, that was, if obviously a lot of you people, follow elections and you know that Democrats tend to be supported in urban centers and Republicans tend to be supported in rural and exurban areas. And so there's a gradient sort of donut effect in metro areas. You look at a map of Maricopa County, blue in the center, dark red in the outskirts. So what we did is we took the precincts and said, okay, put the precincts on a graph and tell me how close it is to downtown, probably like a mile from here. And then tell me what their vote percentage were for Donald Trump. Because if ballots were injected or any sort of nefarious issue happened with the ballots because of the way that all of this works, it's near 10,000 different types of ballots. It's near impossible for anyone to just know exactly how these ballots, if they're going to inject ballots, they're just injecting ballots. And these numbers were organic. You saw in the places that were less than a mile from downtown Phoenix, 80% Joe Biden, 90% Joe Biden precincts. And as you got farther away from downtown Phoenix, it shifted to Trump. And the area in the middle, which is about 10 miles from here, that I call it the 101 Beltway, that's where the swing area of Maricopa County is, and those places were the 50 percentiles. And then as soon as you got into Gilbert, as soon as you got into North Phoenix, it went very Trump very quickly. And the reason I tell you this is these are sorts of the data sets that we use to look at the election and say, this is why we can, these are the things you have to look at. And why this is important is that, I'm sure I've said that like 3 times. When we look at the audit and a lot of the things that surrounded the audit, Dr. Shiva just recently published something saying 200,000 signatures were bad. Jovan Pulitzer, he's another one that puts out a bunch of stuff. He talks about the paper all the time. So these people, they'll put out a study or a claim. And what they do is it's essentially exploratory data analysis. They put together the hypothesis, and they say, okay, I believe X, Y, Z happened, and now I am going to produce data that proves that X happened. But that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to put out your hypothesis and then do everything you can to poke holes in your hypothesis. That's what's supposed to happen. So someone like Dr. Shiva, he puts out a study that says 200,000 ballot signatures were mismatched. It took us a hot minute to find that this study, he was using the actual envelope signatures, and he was using, because he doesn't have the actual signatures for no one has the signatures that are on file. Okay, so he used mortgage signatures, which problematic anyway, because now you're talking about, you're only really looking at homeowners in Maricopa County because you're looking at mortgage deeds. But that being said, looking at mortgage deeds, and then he chooses a signature and said, see, these signatures don't match because we used a notarized, he uses a lot of words saying these are notarized repository of signatures and they're just as good as what the county has. And so then we look at it, we look back at the repository and say, dude, that's not even the earliest signature. There's a more recent signature that does match that person. So you're basically, one of 2 things is happening. You're either just being very irresponsible in how you put this data out, or you're doing it on purpose. And that's problematic for all of us because a lie travels faster than the truth. It takes us a lot longer to figure out what went wrong. And we found that all through the audit, it took us so much longer to figure out what was going on than the claim that we were chasing. And it's a problem. So, does it get better? I'm an optimist. I think it will get better. I think the coverage of elections will get better. For my part, I will continue to reach out to, and I'm going to continue to listen to people that believe that there are problems with the election. I don't want to be dismissive to these people. I think we're in a situation now where experts have a hard time with this because experts are, we tend to, and in anything, we saw this in COVID-19, we see this in anything. If you're an expert in your field, if someone questions something you did in Expert 101, you're like, why are you, this is so simple. Why are you questioning me on this? But, and so I'm guilty of that too, but the reality is that elections are extremely complicated and I do need to sort of downshift a little bit and understand that we do need to articulate as the media some of these very basic things. Even when they're challenged, we still have to articulate them. And we also have to, when things arrive, like I said, if I looked at that precinct distance chart that I did, and there was a precinct that was completely out of place, well, that deserves scrutiny. That's a situation where, why is that precinct that is in an area clustered with 50% precincts, why is this 70% Biden? Now, that only happened a few times, and it's all tribal reservations, but if it wasn't that, I would want to know why, okay? So, and that's our job, is to figure this out as we chase the data. And election analysts, we're gonna have a very different world of election analysts coming up because of what happened in 2020. And I'm very excited to see what happens with, I think that things like the cast vote record are going to be looked at with a lot more scrutiny. I think that, I've seen the legislatures thinking about making the ballot images public. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that, but eventually, that's something that, if it gets part of the public record, that's another sort of data set that we can use to analyze these elections. And I think all of this is important. So again, I'll keep watching the numbers. I'll keep, I'll let you know if I see anything. And again, thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Garrett. All right, how's everybody feeling? Good? Vibe check. Good? All right. We're down to our last two speakers for tonight. Oh, party foul. Well, we're down to our last two speakers, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be here, taking the time to learn and hear from one another. Next up, we have Maricopa County Recorder, Stephen Richer. Please help me welcome Stephen Richer.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right. Thanks very much to Arizona Talks. Appreciate it. Yeah, I see a lot of people going to the bar now. Reasonable. Yeah, Matt, I see you. I'm sure you really value what I have to say. All right. You're 20th in line? No problem. Okay, Raquel said we're supposed to speak, our instructions were to speak from our heart. But with the exception of my wife, I've been trying for 36 years to pretty much pound out my heart and just turn myself into a logic, facts machine, which is why I'm really nervous about these proposals to ban machines from elections because, I like to think that I have a kinship with them. Kylie told me I was supposed to, he said there hasn't been enough disagreement in previous iterations of this. He said I'm supposed to say something that hopefully will offend everyone at some point throughout the talk and hopefully something that everyone will disagree with. So we have Stephanie here from National Review, so I'll get started with that. National Review is the best publication in the United States. Yeah. And conservative ideas of free minds and free markets will lead to human flourishing and human happiness. All right. Hopefully I aggravated a few of you with that. So, the rest, I'll jump to the non-controversial stuff. My name's Stephen Richer. That's hopefully not controversial. I'm the Maricopa County Recorder, also hopefully not controversial. Everything I learned about elections, I learned from Garrett Archer or Ray Valenzuela, which is not controversial either. And what my office does. So my office oversees the recording of public documents. That's where we get our name, voter registration, and together with the county supervisor's election administration. So I ran on the promise to make the recorder's office boring again, which has been a struggle. And over the past year, we've been in the eye of the storm. Sometimes people ask me, did you expect it to be this crazy? No, not at all. I never thought I'd have to send staff home on my third day in office, January 6, 2021. I never thought that a former president would make election myths his entire purpose in life. I never thought that of all the gin joints and all the towns and all the worlds, that the focus of this conversation would be on Maricopa County, Arizona. I never thought that the following would become a regular part of my life: kinematic artifacts, cyber ninjas, bamboo fibers. I never thought that I'd be the subject of a deep fake. I never thought people would send me orange jumpsuits. I never thought the internet would be so interested in my progressive baldness. Jordan, I owe some of that to you. But as long as my wife's okay with it, then I'm going to keep rolling with it. I never thought a former president would call me out by name for going to a cocktail party. Jordan, again. I never thought Kelly Ward would accuse me of breaking the law. I mean, maybe I should have spotted that one coming. But she did, explicitly, as recent as 2 weeks ago. I never thought that the people I consider friends would tell me that I'm a traitor and I should be imprisoned. That one disappoints me. I can promise you throughout this, I haven't cherished losing any of those friendships, and I didn't intend to lose any of them, and it saddens me. But on the other hand, I never thought complete strangers would see me sitting at a table and would buy me lunch. I never thought people from all over the country would send me supportive postcards. I never thought I'd make Anderson Cooper laugh. I never thought I'd be so blessed to work on something so meaningful that will go down in American history books. This one's a little weird. I never thought that Adrian Fontes would be the first one to tell me that a drink at a bar had been named after me. But he was the first one to message me about it, which was, I hadn't received a message from him in a long time. I never thought that I'd work with such dedicated, awesome coworkers. Seriously, I don't say this to every workplace I go to, but of all the places I've worked, you guys are the best. So that's the stuff I thought would never happen. And now I'll give you a few thoughts, just again, to hopefully aggravate all of you in some capacity. And afterwards, you can tell me why I'm stupid or wrong, and I assure you I've heard it before. So one, we're talking about elections. But elections, in my opinion, is a proxy war for a war on our institutions, whether it's elections or criminal justice, a war on objective truth, and a war on the epistemological process. Two, I've seen no evidence to suggest that there is any significant material voter fraud or voter suppression in Maricopa County. Yay! Three, the challenges that our office has faced over the last year, the lies about the 2020 election, the threats, the investigations, the disinformation, and the ongoing nonsense would not be made any better by the federal election laws proposed over the last year. So hopefully that gives you something to think about. Hopefully that gives you something to complain to me about. And hopefully we can do it civilly and over beers. So thanks very much.
Hey, I'm Jared. I am the programs director with Arizona Talks as well, as well as the Dilettante Sound Tech. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight and supporting our mission of continuing diverse and civil dialogue. We have one final speaker this evening, please welcome Arizona Secretary of State, and I hear she may be running for governor, Katie Hobbs.
Thank you. I hate being the last speaker, and Stephen's a hard act to follow. But so I'm Katie Hobbs. I'm the Secretary of State. I am so thrilled to be here and be a part of this really important conversation about elections, which for some reason we're still talking about the 2020 election, and we're almost in the 2022 one. So just a little bit about me. I was born and raised here in Arizona. And very early in my life, my church community just taught me the value of community. And I knew from an early age that I wanted to help other people. I didn't know what that looked like, but I ended up becoming a social worker. And that's eventually what led me to politics. Heather Carter and I ran for the legislature the same year. I had a little bit different path than you did to get here, but it came out of my experiences in my professional life that we needed to do better for Arizonans, and that the people I worked with, the most vulnerable people in our communities, didn't have a voice, and I wanted to help them have that. And so that's why I ran for the legislature and eventually ran for Secretary of State, because I saw this as a way to help every Arizonan have their voice heard in our election process. And I think we've done a really good job of doing that. I don't want to dwell on the 2020 election, but I think it cannot be overstated. And I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know where to go for the right information. Then they see all this misinformation, then they get confused about it. The 2020 elections in Arizona were the most secure elections we've had in our state's history. And despite many, many claims to the contrary, it is also clear that we can have both accessible elections and secure elections. 2020 proved that, and we're going to do that again in 2022. This election was historic for so many reasons. Any election is an immense undertaking. You've heard many people before me already say that elections are complicated, and that is the mantra in our office, in the Secretary of State's office. In 2020, this complexity was exacerbated by many challenges, including a pandemic and including the widespread misinformation that unfortunately we're still dealing with. But this was an extremely well-run election and saw historically high voter turnout, more than 3.42 million ballots cast, and turnout was nearly 80%. And we saw our mail-in voting system utilized more than ever before, also a very secure system that works, and helped make sure that that participation was really high in that election. I think that the continued environment of misinformation that we are in is really one of the biggest threats to the future of free and fair elections, both here in Arizona and around the country. And so heading into the 2020 election, we knew that there would be unprecedented legal challenges, and we had worked with a lot of legal experts leading up to the election to be somewhat prepared for what we weren't really sure was coming, just knowing that it would be unprecedented. We knew that disinformation would continue to be a problem, and we were prepared for that. We had invested significant resources in public education and plan to continue that after the election, which we did. And Garrett talked about pre-bunking, and we feel like that's a lot of our job too, just providing information about how election processes work to demystify and provide transparency into them. Things had gone incredibly well in the first two elections of 2020, and all indications were that the general election would be the same. And in fact, it was. That didn't stop the immediate spread of conspiracy theories and claims of widespread fraud that we continue to see today. And after the election, we were on regular rotation on national news to provide updates on counting and what was going on. And during this time, I remember learning about a lot of these unfounded claims in real time from these national reporters. It was quite interesting. So early on in this whole time period, which is a big blur right now, I still believed that people involved in helping to spread these conspiracy theories and lies were simply uninformed, and that they could be reasoned with if they had the right information. And we were committed to continuing to put out that right information. Since then, it's become really crystal clear that many of these true believers won't be reasoned with. And the very intent of this ongoing propaganda campaign is to continue to sow this very doubt and undermine confidence in our election systems. Our election processes and results survived 9 post-election challenges, but that didn't stop the attacks. The democracy deniers are intent on continuing their assault in order to continue to sow doubt, to justify laws that attack the freedom to vote, and to create rationale for election subversion activities like the Arizona-style forensic audit. And to be clear, that's not really a thing that we do in elections. It's like a made-up thing to make people feel better. Sorry if that's controversial. No, actually, I'm not sorry. Assuming that you're all familiar with it, I'm not going to belabor the audit, but there's a pretty comprehensive report that my office published. You can find it at azsos.gov. It's right on our front page. And then also Maricopa County has published numerous debunking of the claims made in the so-called audit results. The bottom line is that for the last year and a half, almost a half, we've been ground zero for these kind of election subversion strategies to be honed and the playbook to be written across the country. And whoops, I missed a page. Sorry. No, I didn't. The other thing I want to say about this activity in Arizona, I mean, we're really concerned about the future of elections in the country for many reasons. And like Senator Terán talked about, there's more of us on the side of fighting for democracy, and I believe that, and I think we'll win. But we're in a really scary time for that right now. Another thing that this has really created is this atmosphere of threats and hostility towards election workers who, for the most part, are not elected officials like myself and Recorder Richer. They're just public servants doing their job. And my office, for example, and this is not unique to my office, it's happening across the state, particularly in Maricopa County. We've been under a near constant barrage of harassment through phones, emails, social media. This has caused trauma, exhaustion, burnout, and turnover. And for me, this has hardened my determination to keep doing the job that voters elected me to do. But I know for many, I can't say that for everyone. And I'm worried about the impact that this environment will have on the future of the professional election workforce. It's a real threat to election administration in the future. So one final thought in terms of the future impact that all of this will have on future elections. I often describe the attempts to undo the election of 2020 as throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. The fact is that most of the people involved here know that there's no such thing as decertifying the election or any of the other crazy things that they're calling for. But they're watching what sticks. And they're going to be back in 2022 and 2024 with their strategies honed and more of the stuff that sticks. And so we have to be vigilant. It's not hyperbole when I say that democracy is on the ballot in the upcoming 2022 election here in Arizona and all over the country. And that's why it's incumbent on all of us to help rebuild the public's trust in democratic institutions in 2022 and beyond. And I think that for most of you, you're on that page, right? But we have to know where to get that information, and one of the best ways that we can all work together to protect the integrity of our elections is to share information from trusted sources. And so my office is committed to continuing to share that information with all of you. I know the Recorder's office is as well in Maricopa County elections. Make sure that you're getting and sharing your information from trusted sources. That's the best way that we can all work together to debunk this disinformation and protect the future of our elections here in Arizona. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And that is all our speakers for tonight. First of all, I want to thank every single one of you for joining us, for taking the time to have the dialogue and hear from every one of our speakers. Another thing is we have these conversations also recorded. As you saw, we recorded tonight. We also have an interview series, and I want to invite you to go look at that. You can donate, you can watch, you can participate. All of this is possible through arizonatalks.org. So thank you so much for being here. I want to invite the speakers and the staff to come up here just at the end of it so we can grab a group shot. And the beer is still flowing. So if you have an empty glass or don't have a glass at all, please go back there, talk to Megan, talk to the bartenders down there, and get a beer for yourself. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.